transaction. Like it's the type of transaction that, one, is good because you're getting the patient to do something they should do, i.e. clean their lids better.
Mm-hmm.
But two, it's super high profit for you. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of where the fries order started from, the just conversation around it. But it doesn't have to be cleanser. It can be vitamins. I mean, vitamins have a similar, like the math on vitamins is very similar. So,
no, wow, you said a whole lot. Let's break that apart a little bit, and then I want to introduce you too, because we just kind of jumped in and started talking. But you said that patients and customers, so I'll use that term intermixed. I don't think in optometry we consider patients as customers enough as we should. That might be a different discussion, but they're desperate for you to solve their problem. It got me thinking. I've never walked into a McDonald's and said, I'm hungry. What should I get? Sell me your menu. Right. I walk in, I stare at the menu. I default to chicken nuggets or a Big Mac. And, do you want fries with that? Do you want a soda with that? Do you want a soda, but what size soda do you want with that?
right.
And then, do you want some cookies and, or the apple pie? The apple pie gets me almost every time, but they're desperate for you to solve the problem, but they don't come in saying, hey, I'm desperate for you to solve the problem. They say, I'm here, help me, or I'm here. Right. And so the underlying discussion or communication is I wouldn't be here if there wasn't a problem.
Right.
And so help me.
So, I was reading, I'm a nerd. So I spent a good chunk of the day reading research that various people have done on optometrists. So optometrists in 2022 said that 33% of them are planning to get into myopia management in 2023, and 27% are planning to open up a deeper dry eye practice. So those are the two types of products that we spend time on. Why? There's two big reasons why. Reason number one is this is what the patients are asking for, right? Mm-hmm. So patients now are coming in more often saying, I have eye discomfort. My eyes are red. They're itchy. I get a headache at the end of the day, fill in the blank. So naturally, ocular surface ends up being a place that people are going.
Yep.
But they don't know the words. So if I say to a random patient on the street, hey, you have dry eye, they're like, no, my eyes, it waters a lot. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. They don't know what they're talking about. So they're walking in basically with symptoms, and you have to both diagnose and translate that diagnosis to some sort of treatment. So you have to kind of say, hey, look, that redness and itchiness is caused by the fact that you're not having good tear quality and you're not having enough tears. Here's how we solve that. Mm-hmm. And that leads to, hey, this is not the same thing as having a sore throat and having strep throat. This is a permanent, you have to wash your lids every day, right? That sort of stuff is hard because when you walk into McDonald's, we've been desensitized to what you're buying. But if I just dropped you on a foreign planet and said, go figure out how to buy food, you'd be like, I don't know how to do that. That's essentially what we've done in optometry clinics. We've said, hey, you need to fix your eyes. We put the onus on the patient often to be able to catch all the stuff the doctor says and then be able to translate that on Amazon or go to Walgreens and buy the correct products for the diagnosis of meibomian gland dysfunction, which, by the way, not a doctor, couldn't say the word meibomian for like 2 years.
That was impressive.
So I just want to be clear that that's the level that I walk in. I assume everybody is as dumb as me, which means we don't know what you're talking about. So help us figure out what it is you're saying so that we can then go, oh, and it's even easier if you just said, oh, we've already figured that out. Here's the kit that solves your problem. Mm-hmm. Or, hey, doctor said you have dry eye. Let's get you started on some tea tree oil. Do you want the 50 milliliter or the 180 milliliter? Or, hey, doctor said you had dry eye. Our dry eyes use fish oil. Here's what we do with our fish oil. Let's get you started.
Yeah.
Those are easy things for the patient to go, oh yeah, doctor did say that.
Yep.
Now I just need to translate that into my action. So the part of that I think is a major struggle as we move, as you say, what do we see in the market? Compliance is the biggest issue that we're seeing right now. So a patient walks out of the office with 50 milliliters of tea tree oil and some fish oil and, maybe a warm compress. And 30 days later, they don't come back. Mm-hmm. So does that mean their dry eyes fixed? Are they done? Are they just like, oh, magic? And, with your staff, one of the things I said is imagine if you went to the dentist and they gave you 30-day supply of toothpaste
Yeah.
You brushed your teeth for 30 days, and then 6 months later, showed back up and I was like, oh, yeah, I did that. Like, oh, yeah, 30 days.
Yeah.
Imagine what your breath would smell like. Imagine what the dentist would say. Imagine what all the people around you. And yet, how often do you walk around or see somebody at a PTA and be like, wow, that person's lids, their eyes look awful.
They're gross.
Like every
Yeah.
day,
Yeah.
right? Every day. I mean, I was at a holiday party last night, and I mean, I talked to 4 people, and I was just like, hey, I got some stuff in the car. Like, you just like really look like your eyes hurt. And they're like, they do hurt. I'm like, yeah, you need to clean them better.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's
So,
take care of that.
and it's just that stuff we're not doing enough of.
Nope.
So
you brought up the idea of helping us communicate to patients and customers not only what their problem is, but understanding their problem. Right?
Yeah.
Not just saying you've got dry eye, you've got meibomian gland disease. When you work with offices, do you find that, in what I've seen, I'm curious of your experience, I see they either go too quick, so just here's your diagnosis and we move on, or they get way too much in the weeds, that you've
Yep.
lost the patient in the weeds. Where's that happy medium, and how do I figure out how to get there? How do I get my team to that happy medium?
So there's sort of 5 steps in that transaction that we've sort of mapped out. So the step is, doctor basically says, we're diagnosing you with blank, and we want you to do blank. By the way, a lot of doctors don't say, and we want you to do blank. They just say, hey, you have, blank, whatever the problem is. So first, the doctor has to make sure that they translate the problem into whatever they're going to dispense to solve the problem. So that could be an RX, that could be, it could be any number of things. Second thing is that translation is most effective if you hand the patient something. That's called a patient priming behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So you can hand them a card that essentially says, hey, you have, blank, and we want you to do this. It could be as easy. Drew Bateman does this really well. Dr. Drew Bateman in Lincoln. He has teacher row in his office, and he just hands them the teacher row and says, I want you to get started on this. And it's almost 100% conversion. So it can be as simple as just handing them the product. That second step is you're going to hand off to staff, right? So staff may be like, oh, it's in the EHR, or, oh, I wrote it on my note. But is that note being carried through to every station? Is that EHR being referenced at checkout? So that if, you say, hey, we're going to get you started on a new pair of glasses. Oh, and Jane over here wants to get sons, and, maybe they're in with their kids. And so the transaction is actually complicated. That transaction has to be crossed over from doctor to staff, and then potentially from staff over to another staff who's going to do checkout. So you have a couple steps in there, and those steps all have both the interaction, which is the handoff, and now what am I saying to the patient as they're going through the process of whatever's next? Oh, we're looking at, glasses. Well, is the patient going to lose track of anything else other than buying a new pair of glasses? Particularly a patient that walked in and didn't know that they had whatever the diagnosis was, and they just thought, oh, I can't see very well, so I need a new pair of glasses. That patient really needs something that says, hey, by the way, we're also going to solve the discomfort or the headaches or the fill in the blank by doing this thing.
Yep.
And that really needs to be handled not just with words, but, and I can't speak for everyone, but like, this has got to be dumbtastically simple. Like, it has to be like hieroglyphics, right? So like, translate to them, like, wash your lids, like a picture of somebody washing their eyelids, or a picture of somebody putting drops in their eyes. If you give them a 45-page document that explains all the downsides of Restasis, guess what? They're not reading it. So if you're expecting them to catch the thing on, page 22 that you mentioned, they won't see it because they're not going to read it. It's got to be super, super, super simple. And the staff needs to know, oh, my job is to emphasize certain things based on what is being handed off to me. So if I'm getting handed off glasses, we've trained our staffs very well to be able to sell a pair of glasses. But if I'm getting handed off dry eye, I'm getting handed off, hey, we want to set up a next appointment because this is a person who is a suspect for blank. That translation needs to be something that gets emphasized throughout the process, not just at the point of checkout. Because the person might be like, oh, I'm solved. I got my glasses, so I'm good. So we have to make sure that we're passing that through so that follow-up happens. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. It's so it's really an orchestra or a, trying to think of the, everybody's got their role to play in this experience that the patient's getting, to make sure, one, they understand what they're getting, two, they get what they're supposed to be getting.
Yep.
And one of the big things for us was that priming, because we talked about it. It was actually interesting because one of my staff members said, well, I don't want to give it to them at the front end because what if they walk out without paying? So that's easy to solve. We put it in their ledger right away so that it's already there. But once they have it in hand, there's something psychological, I think, about having it in hand and then having to put it back.
Yep, 100%. I mean, the other thing that was interesting in your office was I said, how do you prime the patient to buy? I think we were talking about a box at the time.
Mm-hmm.
How do you prime the patient to? And your staff member gave like a 4-minute answer, and I just walked over, took a box, and handed it to her. And the point of that is, like, we try to talk our way through this. And like, I was in my wife's office the other day, and the person working the desk basically was like, "Oh, you can get all of this at Walmart too." And it's like, why are you selling for the Walmart Scions? Why are you selling for Jeff Bezos? Sell for yourself. You have the same products, usually at the same or better prices.
Yeah.
Like, what is the invitation to somebody to be like, hey, let me make this an incredible pain in your butt where you're going to have to go all the way back and drive 15 miles that other way to get this other thing, go inside, and we think of it like, oh, we're giving you an opportunity to check prices, or we're giving you an opportunity to save 2 pennies, instead of the patient has walked in and basically been like, I just want you to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Solve my problem. My eyes hurt. I can't see, and it's like, do it right there, right then. And it's going to, it's going to solve most of their problems. Now, all that being said, are there patients that are going to want to go to Costco and get their prescriptions filled? 100%. Are there patients that are going to want to, go to Walmart and check that they can save 2 cents? Yeah. But the point of that is that patient is probably not the patient that is making the doctor a ton of money, right? And so as you think about who your best patients are the ones that are sitting there going, I will pay you to solve this problem. And part of my problem is convenience. Part of my problem is simplicity. Part of my problem is I want to understand clearly what is expected of me over the next 30 days, 3 months, 6 months, etc.
No, 100%. I remember that distinctly when you interrupted the 4-minute answer, didn't say a word, just said here, right, and handed her to the box, and the whole room had light bulbs go off over their head. So,
and it's way simpler than people think it is. Like, literally, if you hand them the product after you talk about it, you've converted 100% basically. So like, our numbers on that are between 90 and 100% depending on the office. If you just talk about it, it's about 20%, because it makes it really easy for everybody to forget and not bring it up, or for you to be in that awkward point where your checkout person is trying to sell somebody on a thing that they don't remember the doctor said.
yeah.
And so it's like, if you can take all of that element out and really extend sort of the transaction to pre-checkout, where they're walking around with the things either in their bag or their purse or whatever, it is a really easy way to add some value for your per patient or per exam revenue. Yeah. So anyway.
Well, it's an easy way of helping them get what they need as well.
100%.
Because you don't have to convince the yes. The yes is implied, and the importance is implied. I don't ask them if they want to come back for their glaucoma follow-up or progress evaluation check or whatnot. I just say, I've got Tuesday at 2:00 available. Does that work for you?
And I think, we don't do enough in the optometry space to replicate what they've done in dentistry, whether that's pre-appointing, et cetera. But one of the things is, it's implied you're brushing your teeth every day. It's implied. Like, the hygiene process is implied in a way that we don't imply it, but we also haven't built that sort of muscle memory for people. Like, we're on the front end of building that muscle memory, but it's rare when we go in and audit offices that the doctors actually say, are you washing your eyelids every day? Yeah. Like, just, are you washing your eyelids every day? And like, it's rare. It shows up in the questionnaire. It's rare. And like, when we go out and just ask our focus groups how many people wash their eyelids, it's about 50-50 washing their eyelids every day. So not to reveal too much about your office, but I asked how many people wash their eyelids, and only 66% of your staff washed their eyelids in the previous 24 hours. And the point of that is, like, if we're not modeling the behavior, like, if we're not out there always doing the things that we're saying that are easy, it's hard for us to get other people to change their behavior. So I was right before this, I was doing research. I was rereading Chris Wolf's initial memo about why Peeq was founded. And one of the things that he specifically wrote in there was how eyelid hygiene is the first step in solving half of the ocular surface issues in the country. There's just like washing your lids every day. Just
Yeah.
it's like, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. That's clinically backed. That's, and it's like, that's not hard.
No,
That's 3 minutes a day,
but it's
and we
something
don't
that
we don't do it. So
something to focus on. Hey, you've talked about being a nerd. You've talked about the research you're doing. Yeah, obviously you're working with Chris and Cheryl Chapman, your wife. But I neglected to properly introduce you because talking with you is so fun. So give us just a bit of background on what you're bringing to the table, why the focus groups, the insights that you share. Really, I mean, for us, make a huge difference and matter. So, what's your background?
yeah. So Tom Chapman, founder of Peeq, with Dr. Chris Wolf, who is an optometrist here in
Mm-hmm.
Omaha, and my wife, Dr. Cheryl Chapman, who's also an optometrist here. Chris has a whole bunch of different ventures around billing and coding. He's a key opinion leader around dry eye. Cheryl's a key opinion leader around myopia management, is the president of the AAOMC. I am none of those things. I am a multi-time entrepreneur. I've been venture capital backed multiple times, mostly with software. So I've built 4 or 5 software companies that are pretty big.
Mm-hmm.
The one that people reference around the country is a company called Beehive Industries. It's a light asset management software that helps small and medium-sized cities. My forte is to take businesses from scratch and get them up so that they're profitable. Within that, I was approached by Chris and Cheryl 5 or 6 years ago, and they essentially said, hey, we think people should probably wash their eyelids more frequently. Can you help us figure out how to build a company that does this? Like and specifically it was around doing market research around the BlephX.
Mm-hmm.
So we did do research on the BlephX, and we were like, it's not a big enough market to target blepharitis in office. Like BlephX is doing a good job. It's a product that we don't think we should try to compete with. But in our conversations with doctors, and so the process essentially of doing that market research is you go out and you kind of like Google, how big is the dry eye market? How big is the optometry market? So like the optometry market in the United States is about $80 billion. The
Wow.
dry eye part of that is between 7 and 8 billion, depending on whose research you look at. If you look at how many sufferers there are, et cetera. So you start and you do a top down, and then you do a bottom up. And the bottom up is you go and talk to Dr. Werner. You say, Dr. Werner, how many, blepharitis patients do you see per month? And you might say, oh, I see 7 per month. And we kind of do the math, and we say, all right, if you see 7 and you do, $250 per, how big is that market? You kind of want to see the market be roughly the same size from top down and bottom up. So when you have a huge gap, you're like, well, we don't really know. When you start to see the market come together where you can go like, all right, this is pretty big, you start to go, oh, this is an interesting opportunity. So compare, the blepharitis market, and say it's $40 to $50 million, and compare that to dry eye, which is a $7 or $8 billion market. The $7 or $8 billion market is the more interesting type of market for you to build a company into.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk to doctors, they would say things, and this was a very common phrase, which was just like, oh, by the way, so we're asking about the BlephX, blepharitis, et cetera. And by the way, if you can just figure out how to get people to wash their lids, that'd be awesome, because eyelids are gross. And we're like, well, that's interesting. And if you hear it, if you do 50 interviews and you hear 35 different people sort of have that as an insight, you start going like, well, what does that mean? And you start going like, well, how is that market put together? What does it look like? So we started going out and sort of pivoted a little bit down the path to say, like, I think what we want to do is really have this behavioral change for consumers, for patients, to actually change the way they take care of their eyes. And as we dug into that, we discovered things like, oh, people are looking at screens more often. We blink less frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 100 more minutes from 2013 to 2023 in terms of the amount of time Americans are on screens.
100 more minutes a day?
Per day.
Wow.
And we blink per, 20 to 33%, depending on which study you read, but just a lot less frequently.
Yep.
When you're doing that, you're just not creating good quantities of tears, and you're causing dry eye. Add to that medicine, Accutane, medical procedures, LASIK. Add to that environmental factors, wildfires, air conditioning. And you just have seen this huge shift. So from 2000 to 2020, 3 million Americans had dry eye to 20 million Americans have dry eye. Mm-hmm. By 2030, it's supposed to be 40 million Americans with dry eye. Some of that is age. Some of that is like, It's more female
Right.
to men. It's 2 to 1. So you all know all of this, but as somebody who doesn't, who's not doctoring, who's looking at this as a market opportunity, we do a bunch of market research around those sorts of things to say, well, what's the right approach for us to take a 55-year-old woman whose eyes hurt, who has dry eye but doesn't know what it means, and turn that into somebody that's a compliant patient that a doctor's talked to? We think there's two different paths. The first path is the optometrists, who are the thought leaders on this, have to be able to talk to their patients about dry eye in a way that the patient, who is essentially completely uneducated,
Mm-hmm.
can go, oh, that makes sense to me. So if I go to like, my mom and say, hey, tell me about dry eye, she'll be like, oh, it means your eyes are dry. And it's like, well, that's not really what it means.
Right.
You know what I mean? That those aren't even the symptoms often, that you have eyes that are dry. And that's the challenge. It's right. We have a phrase that isn't necessarily overlapping. And it's kind of the same thing around some of the other things. So I mentioned earlier, 33% of offices in 2022 were looking to add myopia management. So some sort of orthokeratology or some sort of atropine into their office. Well, if you go and just talk to a random parent, a 35-year-old parent who works in a bank, and say, hey, we're going to do this stuff with atropine, and the primary care physician is going to be one of the people they ask, is this a thing? How often does that primary care physician be like, oh my gosh, you can't use atropine in the eyes, that's insane, or you
Yeah.
can't do this, or you can't do this? Like, it's important that thought leadership comes from the top, or the doctor, the most trusted healthcare person in the country, by the way, also the most trusted person to recommend a product in the country, is
Really.
saying things associated with why this is an important thing. So think of the behavior change we're trying to emphasize when it comes to whether it's Peeq or just like dry eye treatment. And it's like, thought leadership is number one.
Mm-hmm.
Hence why we go to optometrists. Hence why we talk to optometrists. But then the second piece is, how do you push that up? So one of our markets that we spend a lot of time with is actually dance teams. So we've
Oh.
talked about this offline before, but
Yep.
we were shocked when we did our focus group. So a focus group is usually a group, think of like a big table. So it could be 6 to 12 people, where you present, maybe you have them all wash their face with a cleanser and say, tell us about what you think. How does it smell? Like, etc., where you're trying to get sort of group think to come out and kind of reveal stuff. But you
Mm-hmm.
also ask questions like, tell us what it looks like when you wash your face at night. And it's like, how are you feeling? What is it? And often you lead with doing individual interviews, and then you probe into a group that might be able to elicit more thoughts and feelings from each other as they're going through that process. So we'll go to a focus group. And so we did focus groups in the fall of 2020. So during COVID,
Yep.
it was really tricky. We did them via Zoom. It was awful, but it revealed that these dance teams are dying for something to take off false eyelashes, because it's such a pain in the butt that you go to an event that's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Thursday night, you got to get your lashes off, and then you're reapplying them on Friday morning, and then Friday night you're taking them off, and then Saturday morning you're reapplying, and then Saturday night you're taking them off, and it takes 30 minutes with sort of their standard washing procedure, whereas terpenforal, tea tree oil, actually has a chemical reaction with the glue, and you just take them right off. And so
Hmm.
it took something that was 30 minutes down to 5. We didn't know. It's not like there's clinical research that's like, here's how you take off falsies.
Yeah.
It was a thing that came out because these moms had come to these focus groups, tested the product, and had their daughters test it, and they found that it took off these false eyelashes. So 2 Fridays in a row, we had moms pounding on the door like, we'll take everything you have in your newest batch. We'll buy it all, because we're going to a competition this weekend.
That's
And
a good problem to have.
yeah, I mean, so the point of that is, when you're thinking about how to build a market from scratch, you're kind of thinking both like, how do you create thought leadership around this is a real problem that needs to be solved, as well as some virality to people who are that's an urgent problem. It's
Mm-hmm.
a top 3 problem. So for a dance mom going to a dance competition with 30 girls that they have to get the eyelashes off, it's an urgent problem.
Yeah.
And so we kind of think about that whole process as, how do we get the customers to drive us towards these decisions, rather than us just saying, oh, we know what's best. It's usually like, oh, we had no idea that was out there. That's interesting. And then we drill into it, put data around it, et cetera, test it, see
Hmm.
how it, responds in the market, see what other products are necessary around it. So anyway, all
Well,
those pieces.
that's super cool. I we had talked about a little bit of how you got to what you're doing, but I would have never thought that that's what came out of it. And my false eyelash wearing experience is none. Um,
Same.
my daughters do, my daughters are dancers, and they do their thing in the bathroom and come out fine. But they did appreciate the being able to take off the makeup easier. My youngest appreciates the just how it helps her acne. And little things that I didn't bring it in as an optometrist to treat because I'm treating dry eye. I'm worried about the Demodex and the collarettes and things that build up.
So one of the things you asked me to talk about, that this
Mhm.
seems like a good segue from where we are,
Perfect.
is the personas of doctors that we use.
Yes.
So we, we've interacted now with more than 500 doctors where we spend time with them. And, sometimes that's 10 minutes at a trade show, but frequently it's in some depth where we've spent 2 or 3 hours together. We at Peeq have 11 personas. And I'm telling you this less because it's like, one, I think you thought it was funny that we had all these personas
Yeah.
and did that. But two, when we think about how to provide advice to our clinics, we usually say, who's your perfect customer? So Cheryl, who is in a suburban area, upper middle class, it's the fastest growing community in Nebraska, really is targeting moms with 3 or more kids because they buy 5.3 pairs of glasses per year in her clinic. There's about 40 of those parents sitting in her patient profile.
Okay.
So we do the same thing with our customers. We go through and we say, who's our best customer? Like, who is the easiest for us to sell, buys the most, sells the most, repeats the most, etc. And I could go through and say, oh, here's our list, but that seems a little inappropriate. But we have two different groups that we specifically target. So we have a group that we call Denise Majors. Denise Majors is an empire builder. So, and again, she's female. Part of that is there are a lot of females entering optometry, but
Mm-hmm.
a high percentage of our best customers are female optometrists because they've had the problem, right? So when they're like, oh, I get how this works, et cetera, et cetera.
They
So
relate to
most
it.
of our personas are actually female. So Denise Majors, usually about 40 to 50 years old, multiple practices, has a real focus on building the business part. So you might call her a business or a business science optometrist,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to somebody that's focused on the science or science business. The second group is Jen Walker. Jen Walker is a key opinion leader. So my wife is a typical Jen Walker. So science business, but like has a good, robust practice, but is very interested in how do I take this thing that I know to be scientifically true and get it to my patients in a way that it becomes useful from a business perspective. So she has done a great job around myopia management. And in that, she's done a really good job of identifying, here's how I'm going to get to the customers, et cetera. But it's because she's a super nerd around myopia management, not because
Yep.
she's like, this is how I make bank.
Her excitement
She's
carries
like, no,
through
I
on the.
want to treat that specific thing.
Yep.
So when we look at the market, if you said somebody walks in, who's our top two? Those are the two that we're looking for that walk in, because those are one, the easiest ones for us to talk to, and two, typically understand why subscriptions and why boxes and why the products make sense from a business perspective.
Mhm.
We have some other groups that we sort of like. We have one that's called Denise Tuesday. Denise Tuesday is like a husband and wife combination. So wife optometrist, husband is like the clinic operator. So maybe it's the office manager or the business manager. And it can be reversed. It's often reversed. They make a decision usually in like as a couple. And
Mhm.
so like they're often having conversations with each other about, should we do this? Should we not do this? What should go in a box? Which products do we have? So the optometrist in that relationship is usually heavily science, and the non-optometrist is usually heavily business. And then we have a couple, like we have one that we call Yale Trammell OD. That
Yale
stands for
Trammell.
Yale Trammell stands for young traditionalist. So it could be somebody who's 30 years old but sees the market very much how the market was 30 or 40 years ago. So is thinking about this like, my job is to bring a patient in and get them into the right pair of glasses and get them out, see them again in a year.
Mhm.
And I'm really thinking of this market as I'm a doctor who cuts glasses, as opposed to somebody that's like, I'm a heavy science doctor that wants to go deep. So we have a heavy science doctor. This person buys frequently from us, but they're really hard for us, like hard in a good way, but like they are challenging. They want to see all the clinical evidence for everything we've ever done. So that's the Kathy Zhang customer. And that customer will call us and just essentially say, hey, can you give me, the 4 clinical studies around terpenoforol? I really want to understand how you're doing this. Or might say, well, I don't believe that the wave is safe because of vibration. And we say, well, here's the 35, here's there's really two tracks around vibration. One is Department of Defense, which is kind of whole body vibration. And then one is specifically about vibration on rat eyes and rabbit eyes. And we're like, here's that pile of research, but they want to read it all. And they want you to basically quote like page 27 from report X. And it's like, look, I'm not a doctor. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know what you're talking about. Like, I believe that that's a good question, but we'll have to get Cheryl or Chris to answer it. But we have 11 of these. And in that, we know when we talk to somebody, they're a good target. This goes back really to the point that we were talking about earlier, which is if somebody's making a decision based on 2 cents on your eye drops that you're selling in your clinic because it's 2 cents cheaper at Walmart, they're probably not your perfect customer. Like there aren't a lot of customers that are going to do that. So for a lot of doctors, that's been, oh, this person is a big, this group is a big insurance carrier and we have a hard time selling extra or making money or doing all that. Or maybe it's this, in this office location, we have a whole cluster of people that fill in the blank don't come in on Tuesdays because there's something going on. Like those are important things that are unique to every practice. Not every practice has the same personas or types of customers. Even if Aaron, who's in suburban San Diego, talks to Chris, who's in suburban Omaha, those customers are not the same people. Like they don't have the same buying habits, etc. So like one of the things that we see that's a big sort of differentiator is people often want to know on the West Coast, what's in your products, what's your environmental standard, all these sorts of things. Whereas in the Midwest, that question never comes up. And I'm not valuing that as a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying that changes the customer dynamic. Yeah. And so those sorts of questions are the types of things that if you understand your if you understand your customer, you're really going to be able to drill into different ways to be able to serve them better.
Yeah. Well, I like what you just said, because we're not segmenting people to segment people. We're segmenting people so that we can better communicate with them, understand their drivers,
right?
So you can serve them better. So now I dare to ask, who am I? What doctor type am I in the time that you've worked with me?
One who doesn't show up in clinic very often. A doctor who does podcasts. I don't know. You're one on a different wall. I think I can go find one. We'll put a little one over there and be like, this is the Aaron Werner.
Put a little asterisk on there. I don't know if that's a good thing that I'm all by myself or not. I'll take it as a good thing.
I tend to think anybody that ends up talking to me for this long is probably somewhere in the business part, either business or business science, for no other reason than you're obviously working outside of sort of the normal optometry channels. So most optometrists are going to work in a clinic. They're going to see patients for a big portion. So as you see people shift into a different bucket, that tends to be an indicator that they're going to be over on the business side. So, one of my favorite personas, and I would like to say this is you, but it's definitely not, is the one we call Aisha Kingfisher, which is code for cosmetics queen. So somebody that is really interested in the cosmetics part of what we do. So maybe is running a new dry eye spa or something along those lines. Okay. But they tend to have a lot of the same questions that you have. You just aren't interested in cosmetics. You see it as a black box that people do. So you're a one of one.
I don't have a personal relationship with the cosmetics. No, I enjoy the business side. I enjoy the growth and the learning opportunities, and I mean, just anybody that's a wealth of knowledge, I try to soak up as much as I can, because quite frankly, I'm not smart enough to come up with it on my own. So I want to steal it from you and figure out how to turn around and apply it back to my team so that they're successful.
Right.
So that's cool. Now, you guys came up with these 11 types on your own? Was it initiative within just to help you better understand how to engage with your customers who are the practice owners?
So it's actually kind of an interesting story. So we started with, interacting with optometrists, and people were having a hard time keeping who we were talking about straight. So we'd be like, oh, Dr. Smith. And they'd be like, who's Dr. Smith? And so we needed a shorthand to sort of say, oh, yeah, this doctor kind of buys on these types of issues: price, proximity, fill in the blank. And that led to us going into more depth, because we thought, well, who's our Instagram targeted at? Who's our, who is our direct mail targeted at? Who is, each of these things? So we actually will, for most of our direct email, it's targeted at Denise Major, Jen Walker, one or the other. But if you looked at like our direct mail, it's really targeted at somebody who's a more traditional, like what frankly, our best marketing pieces of the last year were
Hmm.
direct mail. So
Really?
we're going to a trade show, come to the booth, we'll give you a gift, have been very effective at getting people to come through. That was a real surprise to me because like direct mail was so out of vogue for so long. But frankly, it's really hard to get through to talk to optometrists because you're typically ending up with front desk who goes into the back room. It's really easy to screen us out and be like, well, I don't want to talk to that person. I don't know that person, etc. So just getting through some sort of gatekeeper has been a thing. But we write that with the idea that like this is an optometrist who's reading the direct mail, who's getting their mail out of the box and they're reading it. Well, that's not every office. In fact, Denise Major and Jen Walker aren't reading their mail. It's their office manager and it's getting thrown in the trash. It's never getting to them. So it's got to be somebody that's seeing it. So, when you think about how you communicate, we think of those personas as sort of a shorthand to be like, oh, this is a good way. Not we don't want to talk to you as humans, but this is a good way
No.
for us to see, oh, here's 3 things that you might care about because other people like you have cared about it. And that's so different doctor to doctor that it's
Yep.
really easy for us to be able to be a little smarter about like, oh, here's some stuff that you probably care about more than the average doctor.
Yep.
So
You know what I love about that is and I like personality profiles. I like disc profiling, but it's super nerdy and
it
to
is
put people
nerdy.
in those boxes. But if I can relate, what you're doing is you're humanizing those traits, and so now you can talk to them about a person. That person has emotions. They have their own feelings. Where sometimes personality profiles are sterile,
Yeah,
and so then internally you can talk like it sounds like you do within your team. Here's this. This doctor is a Denise Major. This marketing piece is targeted to this. Uh, uh, I'm drawing a blank on the names, but you get what I'm saying, right? It humanizes it. It puts a face to it. It puts an emotion, a personality to it, and it is a way to build your internal team because now you've got your own secret language
that's exactly
that
right.
really just drives that culture. We do that in the office already. We shorthand just naturally stuff. No, this is very cool.
The other thing that I would say is if you're looking to do this for your office, so if you're like, how do I do this for my office in a shorthand way? There's a tool out there that's made by Esri, ESRI, called Market Segment Tapestry. And you can go put in your zip code. And I would say most optometry clinics can do it by zip code. And they'll give you the top 5 kind of personas
Okay.
for your area. So pretty sure it's esri.org, or if you just type in Esri Market Segment Tapestry, you can get right to it, put in your zip code, and they'll give you your top 5.
That's very cool.
And yeah, I mean, so it's really useful because they'll give you stuff like, how do you approach this person? Is it a social media, Facebook? Is it Instagram? Is it, TV ads? Like all those sorts of things that people, I think, aren't quite sure what to do. With our customers, we start with that. So like when we have a customer,
Hmm.
before we sort of start really getting into the weeds, we'll usually type in a zip code to be like, okay, who are they seeing? What type of patient is probably walking in the door? Is this a super wealthy community where they're probably in there buying $1,000 frames, or is this a place where most of the frames on the board are going to be 150 to 300? Understanding sort of the market dynamics again allow us to basically be like, hey, here's a thing your patients can use. And I'll be honest, most of the time we've been surprised that we're just really wrong. Like a charismatic doctor can pretty much sell, ice to an Eskimo, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's like the doctor is driving a lot of that behavior in a way that like we're baffled when we
Yeah.
walk into some of the places that are super successful with their stuff because we're like, how are you doing? So we spend a lot of time auditing our best doctors to be like, oh, that's interesting. Like they do these 3 things. So a lot of what I'm talking about isn't Tom's smartness. It's other doctors we're like, oh, nailed it. Super good.
You've
You know
picked
what I
up on
mean?
it. Yep.
So
That makes a
yeah,
lot of sense. And yeah, the market segments is great if we're in Vision Source, and so we get they provide a geospatial report that names the segments. It sounds very very similar and super helpful to know who to curate your office towards. To it,
yep.
that's your market. You want to set it up for the customer so that they feel comfortable where they're at. So
One of the other things that we've seen a lot as we've done this is one of, I think, the common misconceptions of offices is that I should be trying to get new customers from social media. And really, the only way you're going to generate new leads from social media is if your customers are sharing your content,
Mm-hmm.
because it has to get outside of the people who are following you, because mostly it's just doctors and patients that are following you. So if you say to a patient, hey, you should, like, come in and get blank free if you do blah, 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 the patient is unlikely to share that. They might just do that. So we tend to say, use your social for education. Use your social to be able to provide more data and get a touch point with somebody on a regular basis. That's Dr. Werner talking to his patient, not Tom giving you a very well produced thing to go to your patient.
Yeah.
Right? Because your patient's like, scroll away, scroll away. Whereas if you say, hey, computer vision syndrome is a big problem, the 20-20-20 rule, that is way more compelling than an incredibly well-crafted Peeq card that talks about the 20-20-20 rule. And we look at it, we test products back and forth. Like the engagement is about 200% higher when a
Really?
doctor says the same thing as when we say it. And it's just, it could be 2-0 or 3-1. It's not, I mean, I don't want to give you the impression it's 400 to like 100
Right.
or something. But the point of that is, like, doctors, when they think about what their marketing is, they're doing two types of marketing. They're speeding up the speed by which somebody comes back. So in the United States, people come to see their eye doctor on average every 28 months. So if you can get people to pre-appoint or to come back every 12 months, you need 3,300 patients in your folder as opposed to 8,700 patients. The second thing they're doing is you're looking at a way to increase what we call wallet share versus market share. So if I can get my patient to spend $500 in clinic as opposed to $300 because they know I'm offering alternative things,
Mm-hmm.
then that patient is a more valuable patient to me as an office. And that means I don't have to work as hard to get that other $200 from a new patient. And so, we tend to think about different ways that we can get patients to do that. I mean, a lot of what Peeq's built on is that idea of wallet share. How do we get a patient to spend the money with the clinic instead of at Walmart? How do we get
Yep.
the patient to spend, money getting a subscription from you rather than from Amazon?
Yeah. Which is what I would want too. Then I've got more, I don't want to say control, but I've got more influence over the product they're getting. So I know they're getting good stuff that can help them. Tons of good stuff here. And I think that everybody listening is seeing why bringing you out for a little bit and having you talk to the team. And correct me if I'm wrong, because you've got the numbers. I know we just replaced a big order, but we sold that afternoon the amount of facial cleanser that we had previously taken 4 to 6 weeks to sell before.
Yeah. So I'm going to say some things that are, I'm not going to throw your office under the bus. I'm just going to talk.
I'm the leader of the office, so anything that happens there is my responsibility. So you don't have to throw us under the bus, but be honest.
So a couple things that we see. The first thing we see is we will ask doctors, do your patients comply? And they'll be like, oh, yeah. And they'll be like, how many patients have walked back in to buy fish oil, tea tree oil, etc. Tea tree oil is a little easier because most people don't go to Amazon and just randomly search for tea tree oil. I mean, like, not none, but it's unlikely that they're being super compliant. Fish oil people will get from the grocery store or wherever. Mm-hmm. So when we ask that question, the doctor's like, tons. And then you ask the staff, they're like, maybe not tons, but they also, with their boss standing right there, aren't like none. And what we see, what we should see is if you say 40 patients bought tea tree oil this month, well, next month you would want those 40 to be buying again if they're buying small bottles, right? So you should see 80 patients and then 120 patients. And in fact, what happens is like 20 this month, 20 next month, 20 the following month. And so it ends up being really flat. And that means you probably have nobody that's compliant, or they're compliant in a way that, like, who knows what they're washing their lids with.
Yeah.
Right. And that, I think, is one of the big places where when we go out to talk to people, it's surprising. So like your office, as an example, sold the equivalent of about 20 to 25 bottles a month.
Yep.
And it was pretty static.
Mm-hmm.
And that day they sold 16. So the real measurement is how many of those 16 come back in, 1st of January and are like, yeah, I'm out of tea tree oil and I really need more.
Buy more.
Because ultimately that's the way both your office is going to get that increasing revenue, or, subscribe or fill in the blank of doing whatever. And so we're spending a lot of time trying to think through, like, ultimately we want to do what's right for your patients, right? We want your patients to be in compliance. So it's like our job is to figure out how they're buying more toothpaste. so that when they show up 6 months later, they have brushed their teeth for 6 months rather than, oh, I brushed it really steadily for 4 and then forgot for 5 months.
Yep.
And it's like, that's what we are trying to avoid. Within that, very few offices are doing that. And like, we can compare that data to like scleral contact lens orders, like kit orders. Sclerals are like, you sell a scleral box and they subscribe because it's about $5 cheaper than going to Amazon, and you don't have to worry about it. And it's exactly what your optometrist asked. And so they're just, I mean, regular. It's like, yep, I bought it and then I subscribed, and they just, I mean, we send those out every day. Whereas the tea tree oil or dry eye stuff, not nearly as compliant, not nearly as sophisticated with regards to, oh yeah, I got to stay on this. This isn't a thing that I do once. So, you know, when we think about your office, you're more typical. Like, it's really rare that we have a significant subscription on tea tree oil or subscription on dry eye.
Well, we're looking at being no longer typical. We want to be atypical. So I know we're working on the simplicity, because we also found when we looked at the numbers that we just had a lot of really cool products, but too many really cool products that we were offering. And I think we are overwhelming customers and ourselves with the choices. We didn't have a good way other than getting your car, drive back, you know, pick up something and buy it. And so we're building out the boxes to build that subscription order so that it's there in front of them.
I mean, we try to work with offices to say, I'm not a doctor. I don't know which eye drops you should recommend. If you say, hey, we really want to use this and we've never heard of it, which happens not infrequently, we'll track it down and get a wholesale arrangement with those companies. And our thought process is like, look, if you don't want any Peeq products in your box, we're still going to make money on it. Mm-hmm. You're going to make money on it. We're all going to win. And you know who else is going to win? Your patient. Because almost always when we do these orders, we're getting them about 10 to 20% off what they would be buying on Amazon. So it's like, if you really believe that they should use X, Y, and Z, get it to them cheap. Get it to them at a place that is showing up when they need it. Yeah. You know, they're begging you to solve this problem. And like, we're giving you a way to do it efficiently, cost effectively, like all these things. And it's like, and by the way, you're making the money. Yep. Not the richest guy on earth.
No. And I like that. And circling back around to where we started at the beginning, it just starts with a question of, do you want fries with that? Right?
You want fries with that?
How often are you washing your eyelids? Right? Because eyelids are gross. And,
100%.
Which is an amazing statement that, and that you guys, you've trademarked, right?
We have trademarked eyelids.
Because eyelids are gross. And I think that simple of a statement, it just, you said it to my team and they opened their eyes. No pun intended.
I'm sort of surprised, you know, I'm a business guy. I've been super grossed out for the last 5 years as we've looked at magnified pictures of eyelids. I like, between my Boehmian gland expression and people who are like got, sleeves of mites on their lids. I don't know how more people aren't just sort of freaked out by their lids. Like, it's rare that we run into people that start at eyelids are gross. Most people are like, really? No, eyes totally fine. And then you ask, have you cleaned it? It's like, I can't imagine why people think eyes are clean and like beautiful and wonderful when they haven't cleaned them like ever in some cases. Like, how do you, like, why would you think that part of your body would be better than fill in the blank?
I just think we don't think about it. I think it's a, the question's not, why do you think not? I think it's just, we're not thinking about it because it's not discussed, right? We know 100%. To brush our teeth because it's in front of us constantly. And that industry has made a concerted effort to invest in education. As of yet, the eyelid cleansing industry and optometry and high care industry have not made a concerted effort to overly market and educate in that aspect, which means there's a huge opportunity for us to do so.
That's right. So. And the great thing is, yes, it benefits Peeq, but ultimately I think it's a way for optometrists to shift the conversation from just we're glasses cutters to like we're medical professionals that provide a real service that is super influential in your life. So like when you run into somebody who's 60 years old who has acute dry eye and can't go outside, like you feel pretty great when you solve that problem. Like when you run into somebody that's basically like, yeah, I go to bed at 7 o'clock because my eyes hurt so bad. You feel pretty great when you solve that problem, and they aren't hard solutions. And a lot of them are just like, take the time today to save your eyes for tomorrow. And I just don't think we think about it that way because I just think we haven't been programmed to think of our eyes in a way. I used to teach college classes, and I would ask people, would you rather lose your sight or lose your teeth? It was
That's it.
about 50-50 on
Really?
losing their teeth versus their sight. I was like, are you insane? And then I would say, because it's interesting, you spend more time caring for your teeth than your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I was shocked. I'm consistently shocked whenever I ask questions about dentistry versus optometry. So I'll ask dentists, like, why do we come back every 6 months? And they'll be like, I don't know. And the answer
Wow.
is because they've built a really good repeating business model.
Yeah.
So, like, let's imagine that it was every 8 months that you went to see your dentist. Well, every 2 years, they'd lose one appointment. It's like, how do you do that same thing where you're creating a business model innovation rather than just a scientific innovation?
Yeah.
And those are the sorts of things that I think we can learn from dentistry, we can learn from dermatology, we can learn from other places that have already started to put some of these processes in place.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And ultimately it falls back on one of my favorite Zig Ziglar quotes of, to get everything you want, just help enough people get what they want.
That's right.
And they want eyes that work and don't feel bad.
Yeah.
And don't look bad. And starting with just cleaning them every day is makes a huge difference.
Huge.
Yep. So Tom, we went on a journey today. So I appreciate the time. I appreciate the insights, and I've certainly taken a lot of notes, and I had an idea of what we were going to talk about, and I've already chatted with you. So I'm sure everybody else did as well. I will put links in the show notes if you want to get a hold of Peeq, learn more about Peeq and what they're doing. Really appreciate it, and I think the story behind Peeq is the same story. We're all working within the office, just seeing a need and trying to fit a need. Chris and Cheryl certainly did that, and I appreciate your insights in there and helping us make it all better, helping us become better in the practice. I appreciate our conversation, so thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Werner.
Yep. Awesome. Well, until next time, and appreciate everyone listening and joining the Aaron Werner podcast on iCode Media. Please leave a comment. Let us know what you think. Want to know what you're thinking of our conversations. We want you to be a part of those. Certainly want you to share the episode as well. And if you're so kind, leave a 5-star review. That helps us in the rankings. Until next time.